screen. Esther, by the way, can you hear us?
Now I can hear you, yes.
Esther will be joining us on screen in just a moment. There she is, Esther Hertog. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello.
Hi, Esther. Nice to meet you. And
Nice meeting you.
Karen, and I put this computer here so you could look at Esther in a sideline without having to have your back to the audience.
Back to everyone. Okay. Esther, nice to meet you. We've got I don't know, does she see the audience?
Now I
see.
see.
We have a nice audience for you. And that's just the people here. Thank you for making this film. I want to read one thing that I read that I thought was, when you describe yourself, you say that you are a visual anthropologist, that you like to step into the shoes of your protagonists in an attempt to gain a better understanding of their worldview and capture it from the insider's point of view. I think you did that with this film. Thank you for bringing it to us. I'd like you to share with the audience the film you made prior to this one, because I think that's very intriguing way to start. So this is not your first film in Hebron.
No.
Could you share with us your first film in Hebron, and then we can talk about this film?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. I'm very excited the film is being screened in New York festival. My first film was called Soldier on the Roof, and wait, I hear myself double. Is there a way to get away with the echo? Is there a technical way? Because I'm hearing myself double. It's very disturbing.
Right this second. It could be because you're on, maybe they can mute you on that, because there's two. Try it now. Is that any better?
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. That's less distracting. So let's take two. My first film was called Soldier on the Roof, and I filmed the settlers, the life of the Jewish settlers living in Hebron. I still have an echo, so I'm going to be a little bit distracted maybe. And I lived with the settlers for about, in periods, but over a period of 3 years. Every time I went for months, and I lived in a little caravan, and I filmed the daily lives of the settlers. And the film's called Soldier on the Roof, and it premiered in 2012. And it was a very hard film to make. When I was filming the settlers, I wasn't able to film the Palestinians. I could see them in the streets, but I couldn't engage with them because it would jeopardize my contact with the Israeli settlers. So I saw them, and I saw how they would, be stopped and searched by the soldiers, how they couldn't go out of their house without being disturbed. By settlers, how they were harassed sometimes by settlers. So that was my first film, and I just could see the Palestinians. And when I finished my film Soldier on the Roof, I was very important for me also to tell the other side of the story, and that's how Palestinian children grew up in Hebron next to the settlement. And Skies Above Hebron, which I made with Paul King, the co-director, is a film about the daily life of the Palestinians. I can't hear you. I don't hear anything.
Well, hold on. Yes. They're working on that. 1 second. Tell me when. First of all, I'll tell the audience that Esther's in the Netherlands. She lives there, and can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, okay, because I understand you couldn't get a visa to be here with us today.
Yeah, there's
COVID.
travel ban.
Yeah.
And for in 2 days I could fly without problem, but on the 8th of November, everyone can fly, but before that, you need a special national interest exemption, and the embassy just didn't reply or at all. So I'm in Amsterdam. I was supposed to be with you.
So, but it's good to have you at least this way. So I'm curious. I mean, that's very interesting that you made this other film, and of course, you could see all the Palestinians while you were making it. How did you choose the protagonists? How did you find them? How did you choose these young kids? And what was that journey prior to filming?
It's been a very, very long journey. We've worked on this film for nearly 7 years, and in the beginning we were focusing on the adults. We thought we wanted to get to focus on how the history of the adults, how they lost some of their shops, how the streets got closed, and we wanted to make a film about that. But then there was this one father, and there was this little kid hiding behind him, and we were really like, oh, that's really interesting. Actually, the kids are so expressive. And then we decided, after quite a while, no, we should go and focus on the kids. And so we found a few kids, and we asked some people as well, and they proposed the ideal kids, the ideal Palestinian activist kid, and it's Marwan, which you have seen. He's a very educated and quite, he's polite and he's active and he has the camera and he's a very, very, very good character. And then we were like, yeah, he's really good. And then we were looking also for we were looking for a place to sleep, actually. And one of our friends suggested to stay at the family of the Kunebi family. But he already warned us it's going to be a little bit loud and noisy. It's a little bit of a chaotic family. But you can stay there. It's in the old city. It was relatively close to Marwan's house. So we checked out the place, and there were these two brothers playing on the roof with pigeons, and they were shouting at each other, and it was a total mess. And we were like, we have to film them too. So that's how we happened to find also Anas and Amr. Quite by coincidence, the friend that introduced us to the place to sleep was saying like, yeah, but they're not really representing Palestine. Maybe they don't give a very good image of Palestine because they were a bit chaotic, but we really love the mix of Anas and Amr, the two brothers that are wonderfully chaotic and wonderfully funny. And then Marwan was much more serious and gives the more political context and can give explanations about the situation. So we have the passionate brothers and Marwan, the political activist.
How you lived with them, my understanding is, did they know you made this other film with the settlers, and how did you build trust with them? How did they come? Because it takes a lot of trust to have a camera in your house and live with these families.
The adults, the parents had seen my film Soldier on the Roof. Actually, there is this organization. It's called YAS, Youth Against Settlements. And there was this Issa Amro, he's a quite well-known Palestinian activist. He screened the film. My first film, Soldier on the Roof, he screened it at YAS, at this organization, and the parents came there, so they knew that who I was, and they knew I was capable of making films, and they trusted us because we slowly build it up, especially with the kids. You can, maybe the parents trust you, but then you still have to gain the trust of the kids, and that's different. It needs different things. You don't need to be politically correct or need to be on the pro-Palestinian or whatever. It's more, you have to gain their trust whether you're fun enough to be hanging around with. And they're teenagers, so in the beginning they found it really cool to be filmed, and then there was a period that they didn't find it cool and they were running away from the camera, and then you had to gain the trust again. And sometimes we bright Anas and Amr with pigeons. We bought them pigeons. I mean, I say it as a joke, but we gave them, they really loved pigeons, so once in a while we'd go with them to the market and to the bird market, and we say, okay, here's some money, go and buy a pigeon. And Marwan was very dedicated. He's more aware politically, and he knew very much the power of the camera. So he was very willing to participate anyway. He was just way more aware, and he always cooperated very well.
I was curious. I mean, of course, he had a camera that he was always proud to be photographing and filming. And does he do things with his film? Does he send it? I mean, there are organizations, of course, that might be interested in what he's filming, or does he do it just for himself, or what? I was curious about what he does with his film.
Well, like in the camera workshop that Issa Amro gives, Marwan isn't in that scene, but Issa Amro says like the camera it helps you to protect yourself against the settlers and the soldiers. So Marwan knows that when something is happening, you need to film, because the film is really a proof of something that happened, and you can't dispute it. It's just, this is what's happening, and he can see it as a proof. And there's a Palestinian organization called Human Rights Defenders that uploads all these videos onto YouTube and sends it out to journalists or whoever wants to see them. So they just upload all those videos to YouTube for everyone to watch. So that's what he does.
That's good. That's wonderful. How you were there for how many years, and how did you go? I would assume you would come and go and come and go. How did that work?
Well, every time we would go for about a month to Hebron and then take short breaks. Sometimes we'd stay there 2 weeks. Sometimes we would go for, it really depended on whether we had funding or not. And sometimes I had other productions happening. I work also as a researcher and producer in Israel and in Palestinian territories. So sometimes I just would film in between projects. So it really depended on whether I was around or not, and whether the co-director was around. But we at least once a year we were there for a month, sometimes way more. And it was the boys we filmed over a period of 5 years. So we really see them growing up. And we filmed 2 years earlier as well, but that footage is not used. Yeah. So it's a long project.
It takes time to make documentaries sometimes.
Yeah.
Now, Paul came on board. Can you I don't want to leave Paul out of the discussion, your co-director. He came on board in the beginning, and was there the first film I don't think Paul was a part of, right?
He was part as a creative producer. He was my partner, so we lived together, and he's a filmmaker as well, very experienced filmmaker. So he has been always involved. We always were working together on projects. And also when I started working on this project in Palestine, on the Palestinian side in Hebron, it was, as a woman alone, to work on the Palestinian side, it's quite difficult. Unfortunately, the Palestinian society, especially in Hebron, which is especially very traditional, very religious, it's a very patriarchal society. So to have a man next to me who was quite strong, just really helped to get access to certain circles in Hebron, because it's not only that you need access to the families or to the specific kids, but it's also when you walk around at night, you need to know who are the people. You need to build friends and you make sure everyone knows who we are. And it really helped to have a man to work together as a team. Plus, as a wife and man, husband team, we had way more access also to the families. So it was very good. Also, because I had filmed already in Hebron and I filmed the settlers, I was always very worried that when we were walking on the streets where also the settlers come, that the settlers would see me. And I felt very uncomfortable walking around with Palestinians and have settlers who hosted me for so many years. see me now hanging around with the Palestinians. They wouldn't really appreciate it, to say that, to say the least. So what I used to do is I would film inside of the homes of the Palestinians, and Paul would be on the streets. They didn't know him because my first film, I really did all by myself. They knew me, but they didn't know Paul. So Paul could just roam around on the streets, like in Shuda Street, which is one of the streets that is where settlers walk, but also Palestinians can come. So he would be filming there, and I would be inside of the house hiding, and sometimes I had scarves around me so they wouldn't see me. Yeah, that's how so it was perfect to work together.
That's great. That's nice. I don't know, is it time that I should turn it over? Maybe there's questions in the audience. Okay, well, wait, I guess the mic.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me okay?
A little bit, yeah.
Yes.
1 second.
Right. I happen to be a documentary filmmaker as well, a long-term documentary filmmaker. A lot of my documentaries go on for 15 years, so I appreciate the nuance and subtlety that you talk about. And one of my documentaries is about the other side of war seen through the eyes of children. Wow. So I'm wondering if what you learned from both sides of filming, I know you filmed, I didn't see your first film, but I know your film that we just saw, but what did you learn about the children, and is there any kind of connection that they could empathize with each other?
That's a very good question. I think children in general are innocent, and they don't know any better than what the adults teach them. So when adults teach them radical mindsets and teach, for instance, if Israeli settlers teach their kids that Arabs, because they don't call them Palestinians, they call them Arabs, if they're all terrorists and you can't trust them, and but Arab kids throw stones and it's always their fault if they're getting arrested, then kids, Israeli settler kids, will learn not to see the Arab kids as their friends. And the same is the other way around. When Palestinian kids grow up, all they know is soldiers and settlers, and they don't know the normal or the less radical Israeli kids. They know all they know is that, you know, they learn about occupation, they learn everything about what has been done to the Palestinians, but they have no idea, for instance, about the Holocaust. They don't learn about the Holocaust. So how can they feel empathy to Israeli kids, to Jewish kids, if they don't know the history? So it's really the adults we have to look at, because kids, when they grow up, and they're not racist, they're not radicals, they're not terrorists. It's the adults that brainwash them to be like that.
How did the Israeli government allow you to expose or to record all this information, because it makes them look very bad? That's my first question. The second question is, this Marwan was very open as to what he was doing. Did that make him vulnerable? Could they do something so that he couldn't do the recordings? Was he able to do this?
Yeah. Well, about the first question about filming there, well, Israel is a democracy, and there's supposed to be free press, and they do. The Israeli government is committed to free press, so we actually got an Israeli government press card, and I have a Dutch press card, and so in a sense, I'm allowed to do what I'm doing. As I'm also an Israeli, I have an Israeli ID. I wasn't supposed to be in certain areas of Hebron. In the old city, I'm allowed to be officially by law, but it's complicated. Hebron is a very complicated political situation. There are streets there are areas that are just for Israeli settlers. Only Israelis can go there. There are areas where only Palestinians can be, like that's like H1. That's how it's called. I'm not, well, as an Israeli, I'm not allowed to go to H1. H1 is the modern city, but I did go. And the old city is divided into areas where, I mean, Israelis are allowed everywhere, but certain areas are closed down for Israelis and others not. I might sound very confusing. It is very confusing, the situation. It took me, I've been working in Hebron since 2009, and I'm still sometimes, it gets confusing for me. But anyway, where we were living during our filming, I was officially by law allowed to be. I was officially allowed by law to film. We had press cards, and in general, they don't disturb journalists. We did have one incident which was very scary for us, where in the middle of the night, it was actually last year, 1.5 years ago, our last filming period, where in the middle of the night, Israeli soldiers were looking for terrorists because there had been a car ramming attack. I mean, that's what they say. It could have been also a car accident in Jerusalem. So they were looking for their suspect. So they went to all the kids' houses of kids that have been arrested before. And Amr had been arrested once for throwing stones on his pigeons. And they just broke into all those families that had already once had arrest. So they went also into the house of Amr. They broke down all the house, and we lived in his place. And they broke down all the doors in their apartment. And then they went down to our apartment, which is, it's kind of the same house. It's the same entrance, but it's just a different stairs up. And then they suddenly were in front of our door. And we tried to open, but they had some explosives already put on the door. It's an iron door. And they exploded the door open. We just managed to get out of the way so we wouldn't be hit by the door. And we were filming everything because that's what you do. You always film, it's your protection. And 10 soldiers with masks on and everything came in with their guns ready to look for terrorists. But, you know, the whole idea was idiotic because Amr, yeah, he got arrested, but he's 16. He doesn't have a driving license. He doesn't have a car. He has no money for a car. So why would they go into their house anyway? It's idiotic. And then they came into our house, which is a little apartment, which has been rented out for 10 years already to tourists or to people living there for a longer period, but always to foreigners. And they were saying, yeah, we have intelligence and we, you know, the intelligence says there's a terrorist here. And it was really, at the moment when it happened, it was very, very scary. We filmed everything, but they insisted on, well, it's a very long story, but they insisted on us deleting the footage. And in the end, we did delete the footage. So that's the only time when we had really an issue with the soldiers. And it's against the law what they were doing. To ask us to delete the footage is not allowed. But because it was 4 o'clock in the morning, we were very scared and worried. And because the door is broken open, so we couldn't leave our stuff in the room because, you know, there's also thieves, Palestinian thieves that could go into our house. So we had no choice. We couldn't go with the soldiers and we couldn't leave. So in the end, we deleted the footage. So that's the only time when it was really, really not okay. All the other times, soldiers know that we're allowed to film. It annoys them and they can say, stand somewhere else, but you're allowed, even though it's not so nice for the PR for Israel. Did I answer a bit your question? I'm not sure anymore what was the second. Marwan, right? It was your second question was about Marwan, if he could get in problems for filming and for being an activist.
Get into problems, and would they take away the footage and would they stop him?
By law, again, for Marwan, also he is allowed to film. Palestinians are allowed to film by law. So you have the law, and the law is quite, I wouldn't say fair, but you're allowed to film and you're allowed to upload it to the internet, and you're allowed to do with it whatever you want. Soldiers are not allowed to stop you from filming. You're not allowed to disturb soldiers in their work. So also for Marwan, he is allowed to do it, but they can still not follow the rules, and they can still, you know, break his camera. It happens a lot. They can still try to ask for his cards, his recording cards. They're not allowed to do it, but they still do. When you're a soldier, I mean, in the Israeli army, you're under huge pressure, and there's a lot of laws, but you don't know always the laws. And even if they're laws, you feel like a king because you have a rifle in your hand and you can do whatever you want. So sometimes they might know that it's not allowed. I mean, that it's allowed to film, but they will tell them anyway to stop filming. So there is law and there is reality, and most of the time, reality is that Marwan is safe, but you never know. There can always be a radical settler doing something crazy. Marwan has been beaten up by settlers. Soldiers have invaded his house. Footage has been deleted. So what they always do is try as fast as possible to upload the material to the internet or Facebook Live or all that kind of stuff.
Well, Esther, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for being there.
And thank you for your film. And I wish you well with it. Have you shown it in Hebron? Will they get to see it?
Yes, we have, of course, shown the film to the kids, and before publishing it and before broadcasting it on TV, we of course first showed it to them. The plan was to go personally and make a big screening and invite all our friends and in Hebron, but unfortunately COVID messed up our plans a bit. So we're still planning to do it like in person, but it might take a little while.
Well, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for being
Karen
here.
Shapiro, thank you so much.
Thank
you
you.
to all of our partners. I want to give a shout out to Givat Chaviva. I know we have representatives here.
Oh.
And of course, Partners for Progressive Israel once again.
Yes.
Folks, next up in this room at 7:30 is Ahed's Knee.